My name is Jay Vermetti, and for the Plainfield Television Group, in association with the Plainfield Public Library, this interview is being conducted for the Veterans History Project at the Library of Congress. I'm happy to be here with Rick Martin. Rick, for the record, would you go ahead, please state your name, birth date, and birthplace?
Richard G. Martin, birth date June 15th, 1946, Detroit, Michigan.
And which branch of service did you
U.S. Air Force.
And in which era, what years?
Between August 69 and June 73, called Vietnam era.
Okay. All right, you were born in Detroit, Michigan. Let's go back there. What was your family like? Mother and father, what did they do?
My mother was at home. My father ran a small business, a metal stamping business, subcontracting in the auto industry from the time he got out of the Navy until he retired. So it was at the time it was small town Michigan life. Since the town Northville has become a suburb of Detroit. What it is now with Detroit, I have no idea, but it became a suburb of Detroit. But it was a small town rural life, and we were looking at the metal stamping industry because my father and my uncle shared ownership of this small building. Myself and my one brother, and I had two cousins, all ended up working in the business from about the time we were 12. They couldn't go into the factory then, but you could cut the grass, you could pick up the trash, you could work in the office emptying waste baskets. So it was a family factory business.
You mentioned your father was in the Navy. Any other relatives in any type of service? Your uncle, your cousins?
I had an older sister, and she eloped when I was young. She was 14 years older than me, and at 17 she eloped with an older man who just gotten out of the Navy. They've been married now about 53, 54 years and are retired to Las Vegas.
So you go through high school and then you eventually decide to go to college?
Yeah.
Were you given a scholarship to college?
No.
And what college did you go to?
For undergraduate school, I went to Bradley University in Peoria. I went September 64. I graduated January of 69.
How did you decide on Bradley University?
At the time, Bradley recruited basketball players heavily in the Detroit area, so we were familiar with Bradley. And other than that, like many graduating high school seniors, I shotgunned. They had a representative visit our high school. I filled out an application. So I would select one from the ones that accepted me. And I wanted to get a little farther away. Schools such as the University of Michigan did not accept me. Michigan State did, but that wasn't that far. So Bradley was about as far away as I could get from home and get accepted.
And did you have in mind what you wanted to study once you got to Bradley?
I don't know what I want to be when I grow up yet.
Okay.
And I'm 62.
So many of us have that problem. So you graduate from Bradley. Do you have any inclination at all about enlisting in the service, or do you know that the draft is coming your way, or how did that work?
In 68, it's January 69 I graduated. So in 1968, yes, we did know there was a war on. Yes, we did know we had no choice but to be part of it or to run to Canada. My father was a veteran. I was not about to leave the country, so yes, I knew I was going in the service. So when I graduated, I looked at, I now had a college degree and a teaching certificate. When I first went to college, teachers were excluded. They had deferment. But that ended because too many people such as me got teaching deferments, so they did away with it. I therefore looked at the Army and the Marine Corps, which had officer training programs, both of which would have made me a second lieutenant in Vietnam. And from what we knew, this seemed to be would lead to a very short lifespan. There were a number of problems with being a second lieutenant of infantry in Vietnam, so I avoided it. Although my father was a naval veteran, I applied to the Navy, and they were so overstuffed with people trying to get in, because you didn't get killed that often, that they wanted nothing to do with me. And I looked at the Air Force, and the Air Force gave me a physical and found I was qualified for flying, at which point they said, yes, you could join our officer training program and be a pilot. Now, in 1969, although you see a lot of things about the war protests, and they show it, you'll have to also remember that John Wayne, who was never the best actor in the world, won the Academy Award as Best Actor that year. Everybody didn't protest the war. Most people thought we were winning, or whether it's propaganda now or not. And most Americans, in that way, John Wayne, who had Loyal American movies and was a cowboy hero, was given the Academy Award. So a lot of Americans really supported it still.
Did you have any friends in college that said there's just no way if I get drafted I am going to head north?
I was in a fraternity in college, and primarily our goal was beer and girls.
Mm-hmm.
So conversations that had more technical knowledge than beer and girls rarely made it past the first paragraph.
All right, so eventually you are drafted.
Yes, sir.
And you decide on the Air Force.
That's the only one the only logical choice, yes.
And so what's the first step there? Where do you go for your basic training?
First thing, I enlisted in the Air Force because if I had not enlisted, I could have still been drafted. Officer training school was booked, and they had what was called a delayed enlistment. So this is now February, this is the spring of '69. Once I have gone through this process and I'm accepted to officer training school, I raise my hand, enlist in the Air Force, but I have to wait. It was about 4 months. So I am now an enlisted member of the United States Air Force, not eligible to be drafted into the Army, waiting for my officer training school slot to open up. It opened up in the end of July, early August, I forget, and I go down to San Antonio, Texas, to Medina, which is where they have the officer training school. I'm given a second physical at which they determine I have hay fever and flunk me out. They said, you can be a ground officer, but you cannot fly. We don't have room for you. We gave you a flying slot. But because I'd already enlisted and already been accepted, they couldn't drop me. They delayed me for 2 more years. So I now have to wait 2 years for my slot, which is the maximum they can hold it, and they gave me a slot 2 years. I'm not sent home, however, because I had enlisted. I'm sent to basic training because I enlisted to keep out of the Army, so now I'm sent to basic training. I have a college degree and a teaching certificate, and they say the perfect place for me is the Defense Language Institute, where we teach Vietnamese officers how to speak English.
Excuse me, how frustrating is it for you during this 2-year period? You had thought you were going to be a part of an officer's training program, and it doesn't come to fruition. How frustrating was that for you?
I think they just put me there. It's sort of like a convict in jail. Would you rather be in this jail or that jail? My opinion was no more relevant than that. They moved me down there. Had my uniforms. I had no hair. I was standing at attention saying, yes, sir, and being yelled at, and they just put me in a different barracks. Lackland Air Force Base was also, the 2 bases were contiguous. So I just moved from barracks at Medina to a barracks at Lackland and continued on the same thing, standing at attention, being yelled at.
So you essentially spent 2 years, your first 2 years there in that area?
No, I didn't. What happened is I finished my basic training. By the way, because my enlistment was so much ahead of everybody else, I was promoted way ahead of everybody else, and I had a stripe. And then I get out, and now I'm part of the Defense Language Institute, also at Lackland. Once again, you have to wait for a class to open up. At this point, I have about a month to 6 weeks. So my wife comes down, which wasn't actually authorized, and met up with a bunch of other wives and got a cheap apartment. It had been something like this, similar to a very cheap motel, where the motel rooms are converted into mini apartments for spouses. And now what we do is called casual duty. They have nothing for us to do, but we're out of basic training. We're waiting for our tech schools. Now there's about 8 or 9 tech schools occurring at Lackland. Military, police, dog handlers, some people who actually shoot things, and me and the other group I'm with the Defense Language Institute. It's all handled there. And groups of us are waiting for our time to come. So during this time, I'm doing things like picking up papers and clearing up. And one of the first things we learned was nobody's checking up on us. So one of the wives would drive us there in the morning. We all had to sleep in the barracks. We'd get up and grab a trash bag, volunteer for trash, and wander off to pick up trash throughout the base. As soon as we turned a corner, there she was with a car. We throw the trash bags in the trunk, drive off base, and we've got the day free. 4:30, we come back with our trash bags, fill them up out of a local dumpster, walk in, suit, sir, throw them in a dumpster, report in, and we're released. She then drives up the car, and we go back for the rest of the evening. At 10 o'clock, we report into our barracks, go to bed the next day. So this is what we did for 6 weeks. So we went horseback riding, picnicking, whatever we wanted to. But pretty much, in truth, they had all these people waiting for classes to start and nothing for them to do, but they had to follow the rules, and so that's how I spent my first 6 weeks. I went through training and was shipped to Vietnam with the Defense Language Institute. In spite of my many protests that they'd flunked me out of pilot school for hay fever, they sent me off to the jungle. My next catch-22 comes when I arrive. I had terrible allergies. My eyes ran, my nose was runny, I coughed, I sneezed, and I couldn't function. So they sent me to a doctor who said, wow, you have hay fever terribly. In fact, it's bad enough that you might have gotten out altogether if you'd argued enough. And he gave me some pills. Not being a stupid person, remember, I'm 23 and a college graduate dealing with 18 and 19-year-old high school graduates. I immediately went to the toilet and flushed the pills. My eyes ran, my nose watered, but I couldn't function. 4 days later, it was determined I was not functioning properly there and was reassigned to Ellsworth Air Force Base, Rapid City, South Dakota. That's my Vietnam experience.
Did the guys that you were in Texas with in the language school, did they also go with you to Vietnam?
Yes, the term was called pipeline. What we were doing was in Vietnam. It was out of the St. George Hotel in downtown
And you were basically working as a linguist, as a
teaching English as a foreign language to Vietnamese officers.
And what was that experience like? How challenging was that?
Well, I did it with the advanced classes that were in San Antonio. Advanced students in Vietnam had a chance to come to San Antonio, Texas. You may remember sometime after the Vietnam War ended, all the Vietnamese seemed to be in the Gulf Coast shrimp fishermen, and there was a lot of trouble with that made the news.
Correct.
They were all officers coming over to San Antonio for one tech school or another, so yes, I dealt with them. But in this type of a situation, you're going in and dealing with people who already have a basic knowledge, so I would do something like table and then work on their pronunciations and do this. So on the general thing, they're looking at the fact that we're working closely with the Vietnamese. You can't have a Vietnamese pilot coming in, an American say bomb here, and he misinterprets it and bomb there. You want to hit the right people. So the language skills were considered very important.
Give me just a general impression of when you were working with these Vietnamese people. not only in Texas, but over in Vietnam.
I never saw any of them in Vietnam. I was only there 4 days. I never got fully processed in.
But what was your impression when you were in Texas and teaching the Vietnamese here?
I had a teaching certificate. It went in with a classroom. They were all officers in the Vietnamese army. They were courteous, they stood straight, and they wanted to learn, and they had no intention of ever going back to Vietnam. And I was invited over to their, numerous times we could go over to their apartments for dinner. They treated us very well. They were happy not to be shot at themselves.
And did they have their families with them in Texas there?
Well, technically it was not supposed to, but yes, they did.
And you spoke earlier about your wife and your friends' wives and stuff. What was that like when you found out you were going to be shipped overseas, you and your buddies? What was the reaction from not only your wives but from your extended family?
My father, like I said, was a veteran, patriotic. He wanted me to go do my thing and not get killed. My wife was writing letters saying that if I couldn't fly because I had hay fever, why are you sending me to a jungle? Probably her letters contributed a lot to my being shipped back so fast that they couldn't find a logical reason to answer them. And other than that, the wives commiserated among themselves because the whole group, as I said, the term was pipeline. This is where everybody in my class was going.
Your 4 days in the jungle. Let's talk about that.
Tan Sanut is Saigon International Airport, and the St. George Hotel is downtown Saigon. No, I don't have that much memory of it. I was there, and I was being sure that I showed how much I coughed and stuff, and I really did not get along well with the climate. I did need the pills. I just wasn't about to take the pills. Not heroic, but logical.
Well, honest. So then you come back to the States, and you're at Ellsworth Air Base in outside of Rapid City, South Dakota. Let's talk about what you did there.
Start with the Air Force has a specialty training code for each occupation. My occupation was education and training. There was a shortage of Vietnamese pilots and officers needing to learn English at Ellsworth Air Force Base, so I went to the on-base school. There was an on-base school. It had branches of Black Hills State College, South Dakota State University, and the University of Northern Colorado, as well as what is called Project Transition Technical courses. Now, the three schools held regular courses in the evening, and this was considered a regular campus. The technical courses, I would go to a flight line and find a welder, and he'd come teach welding class to people who were going to be getting out. This was job transition. I'm trying to find people for job transitions. My function at that school would be a combination janitor, emptying the wastebaskets, cleaning the back room, sweeping the floor, secretary, keeping their cards clean and ready, security guard, keeping them quiet and straight, and assigning classrooms, and I was sent out to recruit technical instructors. The other instructors coming in were done by the particular college. Each college would have a representative, not actually on the base, but he'd come set up the course and do all that work. And so in that case, I guess I was his administrative secretary or whatever. I'd put the papers together and put out the advertising flyers.
And how many people would be you would be supervising at any one time?
I never supervised. I was not in a supervisor position. There were three people. We had a master sergeant, an E7. He made E8. Running it, and there were three of us doing this job, the same job. I went from E2 to E5 at that base and never supervised anybody. I had nobody working for me except on special details. the job for each of us was the same thing. We traded off which night we'd stay and see the classrooms are clean and straighten up afterwards and lock it up, and we're there the next morning to do all the paperwork.
So you basically had oversight of this school?
The sergeant in charge, well, the education officer was a civilian, GS-12. The sergeant running it, and there were 3 people with my classification as education and training specialists.
Now I also see that you served in Iceland also.
Yes.
Let's talk about that.
Okay. It turns out that the Air Force, in its infinite wisdom, discovers that my 4 days does not count as a remote assignment. I have actually been taking the classes myself, and I earned a master's degree from South Dakota State University in guidance and counseling. And I've spent all the time in Ellsworth Air Force Base. I've never been technically remote because the 4 days didn't count. I've only got Texas and South Dakota. I have to go somewhere remote. So I end up being transferred out of SAC and into NORAD, the North American Air Defense Command. They don't exist, those names don't exist anymore, I guess, but I haven't really followed it. And I ended up at Iceland. The place I was called at Iceland was called H1. It had nicknames, but its official name was just H1. It was a naval base, naval air base, Keflavik Naval Air Station, Iceland, but radar was run by the Air Force. So I was now on a little radar site with 155 men, and we were 6 miles off the other base. There was a road, but it was just a little radar site. And it was definitely remote. What did I do there? They really didn't know what I did there because they didn't have any classification for education and training, so I was reclassified as a clerk. And what I did, the closest thing you can consider to what I did would be Radar O'Reilly. I was in charge of administration. By this time I was a Staff Sergeant E5. Once again, I didn't supervise anybody, but I was the senior person in administration, so I pretty much pushed papers from one place to another.
How long did you serve there?
9 months.
And were you able to bring your wife over?
Yes, but not officially. Remember, I'm remote, so she got an airplane, flew over. We went into town and found an apartment and got an apartment. Now, because it is remote, I can't leave the base, but she's still getting separate rations because I'm married. So I went into we had 2-man rooms. I went into my room, promptly made my bed, cleaned up everything, had a foot locker. There was nothing in it, so it'd be past any inspection. There was nothing out of line. Locked it all up, and then just went into town. And so I worked a regular 5-day, 40-hour week being remote and lived in town and associated with a lot of the Iceland local people and enjoyed it.
And let's talk about the civilians in Iceland. Nice people?
Very nice. Iceland at the time I was there, which is 72 and 73, had about 200,000 people. 100,000 of them lived in Reykjavik, 100,000 elsewhere in the country, and of course half men and half women. The men got on fishing boats and went fishing, and the women pretty much did everything else. Iceland survived on a primary industry of North Atlantic fishing.
Speaking to that, what was the obviously seafood is the predominant cuisine in Iceland, but talk about the cultural differences in terms of eating and food, or did you eat on the base mostly?
No. Military food is all cafeteria line, massive quantities of bad food. So we ate in the town, and I believe the restaurant's hotel, the Eck Hotel, had a wonderful restaurant with a white fish with a shrimp sauce over it that we ate at frequently. And yes, if you go into Reykjavik, the restaurants everywhere, excellent food. The Icelanders had a number of different meals. There were also other Americans living off base, and we ate things like hamburgers and pizzas. So,
And you were there for 9 months, you said?
9 months.
Talk about the climate, the adjustment. Of course, growing up in Michigan, it's...
Growing up in Michigan. The winter, it's dark all the time. Now, one thing I would know, I would leave to go to the club. We had one club, it was a restaurant and bar. You go there for a hamburger a day, and we'd have our meal and play some cards. It would be, I would go before sunrise, and if I spent my full hour there, I'd come back after sunset and miss the entire daylight, which is only about 45 minutes long. And the other end is in the warmer months I mean 50 degrees. You had midnight sun. So the farther north you go, the farther it changes.
Did that cause any sleep deprivation?
Yes, you didn't sleep well when it's still light out. And you're always tired when it's always dark.
So after Iceland, and then what comes next?
What comes next is I was shipped back to New Jersey and given my release.
Did you call your parents, your folks, any family members and say, I'm coming home?
I think I've been talking to them on a regular basis. Sure, everybody knew when I was getting out. I got out, came back to Illinois, moved to Roselle, and got a job at Itasca Bank. Now it's a division of Harris. Worked there for 4 years and earned a second master's degree. Then went to Old Republic Insurance for about 5 years, and then Ford, which transferred me to Minnesota and put me on the road. I traveled all over. Then I got a job with a startup company that moved me back here, and I was with them for 15 years. And 3 years ago I also served on the town board here, and 3 years ago I was elected tax assessor.
Okay. Kids? Any kids?
3 children. I have a daughter, 28, who is moved back with me. She's separated. She's a claims adjuster with Progressive Insurance. I have a son, 25, who's an attorney in Schererville, Indiana.
Mm-hmm.
He just finished his bar exam in law school, and now he's a brand new first-year associate. And I have a 23-year-old son who's a pilot and an FAA certified mechanic, still in school in Daytona, Florida.
So it sounds like education is very important to you and your family, and has been for several generations now.
Mm-hmm.
How did you balance that time in terms of serving in the military and also pursuing these degrees?
Well, I pursued the degrees because I was in education and training. When I was in South Dakota, I was going to be sitting in the classroom a number of evenings anyway. The classes are going, and in truth, my undergraduate grades would not have gotten me into graduate school, regardless of a good GRE. Therefore, because I was actually at a campus running things, I signed up and took the courses. Finally, I presented my GRE, which is very good, and I had an A average and 3/4 a master's done before I ever applied for it. It'd be a little difficult to turn me down at that point. Yeah. So at that point, that gave me my first master's, and if I had one master's, it was easy to get accepted for a second master's. But without the without the military, my grade point undergraduate at Bradley was about a 2.3. I never would have been accepted at any graduate school.
Do you still talk to any of your friends from Bradley that you met?
Actually, about 4 years ago, our fraternity had an old geezers cruise, and everybody that I was in school with, there were over 30 of us on it, a Caribbean cruise for a week, and we had Yeah, well over 30 of the people I was.
How about your military friends, the guys you met in the Air Force? You keep in touch with them at all?
No,
No.
none. Haven't found out.
How about, are you involved in any veterans organizations?
I'm a member of the Legion here, have been since I moved in. And when they hold the parade, if you look back at the film, I'm one of the guys marching with the funny hat on up front. It's easy to be in the Legion because we always rank number one in the parade and lead it off, then we're done quickly.
And the Legion being an association of veterans, but also you provide a lot of charitable opportunities for the community too. Can we speak about that a little bit? What does the Legion provide for the community?
What the Legion does? Well, the Legion runs a Thursday evening bingo game to provide funds, and I frequently work selling tickets to one game or another at that. And then we hold our meetings and donate money to various things, Boy State schools and other things. But there's a number of things that the Legion contributes to. Thank you.
In retrospect, looking back, your time in the service, positive? Was it a positive experience for you?
It's strange, the old Barbra Streisand song about how we remember the good things. Thinking back, I had a wonderful time, an experience I wouldn't have wanted to miss. I enjoyed it, but no, it was terrible. You got to keep your shoes shined, your clothes it, you are always under somebody's thumb, but you do have great opportunities. I'm proud to have served, and I look back at fond memories. I can't remember the TV show I watched last night sitting on the sofa, and if I could remember, I wouldn't care, but the things I did in the service, the activities, are still vivid in my memory. So yes, it's a very positive experience.
What would you tell the youth of America today in terms of why they should or should not enlist in the service?
I'm a firm believer in a universal military service for at least a year or two. It does wonders for people.
What do you think the challenges are for the new Commander-in-Chief?
He got the job. I do not understand personally the concept of fighting a war without rhyme or reason, without knowing why you're getting there. So as far as going off to war and fighting, it has happened all through human history. As far as doing without a goal in mind, this is somewhat confusing to me.
All right, I see, Rick, that you brought some photos by. I thought perhaps we could look at those.
I don't know if it. The one thing I did was on January 23rd, 1973, while I was stationed in Iceland, Jaime, Iceland had a volcano go off. The only thing I could ever say I did above and beyond the call of duty was to immediately volunteer for rescue. You understand, wherever something goes wrong in the world, American servicemen volunteer or get volunteered to go help out. I wanted to go see the volcano, so I charged off and spent the next 10 days as a volcano fighter. Now, at the time, I was a staff sergeant, something I mentioned. One of the classes I set up when I was in school at Ellsworth was a basic NCO school for sergeants. And one of the early things they teach you is that you have to forget how to use a shovel. As a staff sergeant, I would look at a shovel and haven't the slightest idea how to work it. But I would be assigned 3 or 4 airmen to dig something, and they would know how to work the shovel, so I'd tell them work the shovel and I'd watch over them. Now an officer would come along and he'd know why there was a hole being dug there, which wouldn't be any of my business, but I would see the hole got dug properly by people who did know how to work the shovel. And so on. The officer would report his to the next giant, and everyone would go up in the chain of command. So when I went to Iceland, it might be difficult, to think, to fight a volcano, but I was given 3 servicemen, a truck and a driver for the truck, and we would get a key and an address. And we'd go to this house, go in, and move the furniture out to get it out of the way of the lava flow. Other people were doing different things. My job was to move things out of the lava flow. One thing I do recall, there was a hospital, and it was a long, thin. It wasn't a tall, rectangular building. It was a long, thin building, as most of them in Iceland are. And we were hauling some of the expensive medical equipment out the front door as the lava flow started to crush the hospital from the back. So we're moving out the front with equipment, and the lava flow is coming forward at it. You could outrun the lava flow, but you couldn't outwalk it.
So you were in extreme proximity to this lava,
Yeah.
within feet.
Yes, it went off January 23rd, 1973, so it's just below the Arctic Circle. It's cold. When you get close to the lava flow, it's very hot. So we have to wear the cold weather parkas, but we're constantly perspiring from and burning from the heat and freezing from 30, 40 mile an hour winds and 10 degrees below zero.
How long did this go on?
My term was 10 days. The volcano, I think, went on 2 years.
2 years. Wow. And so you have some pictures of
If the camera can get them. Yes, first, the volcano built a mountain in 4 days. The first picture shows what the town looked like before the volcano went off. The second picture shows when the volcano off, it was not a straight up, it was an earthquake. When an earthquake opens
down
the
the
earth,
side there.
yeah, and the whole thing went off. Then one section sort of takes over, and one section builds. And if you look at this picture, this is 4 days later, not just one mountain, but 2 mountains. 4 days. Now, the picture I have here, the dark smoke is the volcano, and the light smoke is the molten lava hitting the Atlantic Ocean. The volcano was actually turned by firing of cold water from the ocean. That we got some pumps out of, not me, but from pumps were brought up, and they shot at one area to cool that area, and then they set explosive charges and trenched the way it wanted to go, and it turned the lava flow, because if it ever closed the harbor, this whole village without that harbor would have been worthless. The only reason they have a village there is a beautifully protected harbor for fishing. So that was done. And the others are just pictures that I took of various things. And the second one, that's me, and that is lava right behind me. At this time, we all took silver dollars to try and stick them in the molten rock and then chunk away a piece of molten. I don't think anybody succeeded. And this, you can see I'm standing here, and the person down there, as I told you, I didn't know how to use a shovel, but I had a crew. He had to dig down. They had to dig down to get to the front door. The lava at that time, the ash at that time, that's not lava, that's ash, was about 5 feet high, 5 or 6 feet high. So we had to go down 6 feet to open the front door. Because this was only a one-story building. You couldn't go walk in the second floor and go downstairs. And of course, eventually the ash, like this building here, gets high enough and that it just crushes everything. So all the furniture I removed was not from the lava flow. A lot of it was from building being crushed from the amount of ash. And here you'll see my luxury accommodations. That section was my accommodation. This is his accommodation, that's his. What happened is they bunked us in a school that was out of the line of fire, away from the lava flow, and still had both water and electricity. So we had about 20 people in a classroom. We moved the desks out of the way and just threw sleeping bags down on the floor, and that's where we spent the next 10 days.
Interesting. Your kids, did they ever entertain the thought of going in the service?
I've talked to it about, my youngest is thinking about it, but on the whole, no. I wish they had. I think they would have had a good time, but no.
All right, Rick, so you're at Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio.
Correct.
Tell me what day-to-day life was like.
Day-to-day life, well, I have 3 different assignments at Lackland. First, basic training. Life in basic training is exactly like they depicted in the movies. They wake you up too early in the morning, yell at you for not making your bed, tear you up, you eat your meal, you march, you shoot, they yell at you if you miss, then you run and exercise, and in the evening they let you alone so you can shine your shoes and clean your uniform and go to bed.
What would the brief respites that you might have in the mess hall, what was that like? What was the food like?
Military food is there's tremendous variety. It's just the food was what you call is plentiful. If I wanted scrambled eggs, I can get scrambled eggs. You go to a breakfast buffet here, you open it up and you've quantities of the dried out scrambled eggs and bacon and sausage and French toast and pancakes. It's the same food as there. We didn't have strange or unusual food.
Were you ever assigned to kitchen, KP?
One time.
And tell us about that.
Oh, that's a wonderful experience. Start with, if anybody's going in the service and gets involved, you want to be on the serving line. The serving line is the people who keep out. Somebody takes a piece of pie, you put another piece of pie down. If you can't get on the serving line, get on anything except pots and pans, because they all work and you get a break with each of them between meals except for pots and pans. A person working pots and pans has no rest. I had it one time when I did it, and I started on the serving line, but somebody bumped me and I got moved and I ended up on pots and pans and found this out. But as I'd mentioned earlier, I had over 4 months from the time I enlisted till I got in, and I became an E2. Once I'm an E2, I never went back because I was in charge. I was a squad leader, and the drill instructor didn't make us go. When the other people had KP, he told us to just sort of vanish, don't get in trouble. So that's what we did. We had the KP off. 4 squad leaders, the dorm chief, and the house mouse.
Overall, throughout your whole time in the service, give me a bit of an opinion of your officers and the people you served under.
One, my time in Texas, I didn't know any officers. They wandered by, I could see them. When I got to Rapid City to Ellsworth, our officer was a GS-12 civilian, and actually because I was taking courses for a master's degree, all the other service people there were officers, most of them. And on the weekends, those were my friends. We associated together. So we'd go to picnics. One common thing we'd do would be a summer picnic up in the Black Hills, where you'd take a bucket of Colonel Sanders chicken, a case of beer. At the time, a popular drink was called Pagan Pink Ripple wine. They're like wine coolers today. And Frisbees, and we also took gold pans, because this is the gold rush era. And so we'd just have a normal picnic, eating the chicken, drinking the beer, and panning for gold.
Any luck in the panning for gold?
I'm sure we did, but trouble is we didn't know what we were looking for. You could also go swimming in Pactola Lake, which is up there. So you'd swim in the lake and jump in from cliffs off, because it was a man-made lake.
Now, Rick, when you went into the Air Force, you started as an E1, enlisted personnel 1, and then you finished at E5, which is the equivalent of a staff sergeant. E2 is a
airman.
E3
is an airman first class.
E4
is now called a senior airman. Then they called it a buck sergeant.
Okay. And E5, of course, is staff sergeant. And you said you had one gentleman you knew that went on to E8, which is?
He was a career, and he was in charge of the office at Ellsworth.
Master sergeant? Is it?
An E7 is a master sergeant. E8 is a senior master sergeant.
Okay. And you had something else you wanted to add?
Well, yes, I do remember you talking about people associated with that during my time at Ellsworth, and just about one of my birthdays, a man named Jim Morrison, who was the lead singer of The Doors, died. And I do remember a weekend wake party that we had for Jim Morrison, and everybody was so hungover on Monday, I don't think anybody showed, and they all got in trouble. We gave Jim Morrison a great send-off.
Well, good for you. Rick, thank you so very much for coming by. We appreciate your time. Your country appreciates your service. Welcome home.
Thank you.
This has been Jay Vermetti for the Plainfield Television Group in association with the Plainfield Public Library. This interview has been conducted on behalf of the Veterans History Project for the Library of Congress. Thank you.